What did you say in court yesterday?
Well, part of the charges in the Manning case relate to documents from Guantanamo called detainee assessment briefs that I was familiar with from my 2-year tenure as chief prosecutor. There were 5 particular detainees that the government had selected as kind of a representative sampling, and what I did is take those classified documents and went out to open source material, much of it available on government websites, and was able to find the vast majority of the information in the public domain, which, to try to establish that there's no harm from the release of the documents on WikiLeaks.
Can you describe the courtroom scene? What surprised you as you went in there?
Well, there was a large crowd, a lot of Manning supporters in the courtroom, as there have been throughout. It was the first chance I had to actually see Private Manning in person, and he's fairly diminutive in size, and I got to speak with him briefly afterwards, and I'd say he's in good spirits and positive, but you can see this has taken a toll on him and is wearing on him, as I'm sure it would with anyone in his circumstance.
Colonel Davis, you also suggested that the WikiLeaks documents on Guantanamo detainees were in fact, quote, wildly inaccurate. Could you explain why you said that?
Sure, and just to add to that, President Obama appointed the Guantanamo Review Task Force that issued a report on January 22nd, 2010. And if you look at the report, his task force came to the same conclusion, that the detainee assessments, which were just a general biographical accounting of who the individual was and an assessment of how big of a risk they were. Even the task force came to the same conclusion, that many of the reports were inaccurate, some were overinflated, some were underinflated. So you can't tell. By picking up an assessment and looking at it, you don't know if it's right, wrong, or how it really fits in. And so certainly my experience from being the chief prosecutor is that just looking at the detainee assessment really had no value. They're based on underlying documents, and those documents are important, but just the assessment itself, which we referred to as baseball cards because it gives you the person's name, height, weight, place of birth, date of birth, that kind of thing, really had no significant value, and I certainly can't see how it would help al-Qaeda in any way to have access to them.
Who were the 5 Guantanamo detainees in the Manning case? I mean, this is extremely significant that you testified on the defense's behalf, on Bradley Manning's behalf, as the former chief military prosecutor at Guantanamo.
Right. I guess as an example, kind of the level of absurdity in this case, I can't tell you the 5 names because the detainee assessment briefs are classified. However, the open source documents I compared to were admitted into evidence. They're not classified. As I stated, 3 of the 5, they're featured in a film called The Road to Guantanamo that you can go on the internet and see who those 3 are. And you'll have a pretty good idea of who 3 of the 5 in the assessment briefs are. But at least for now, that information is classified.
Colonel Davis, you also spoke on Monday to some of Private Bradley Manning's colleagues and superiors in the military. Could you explain what they said, what most struck you, and also your conversation with Private Manning?
Yes, on Monday there were 4 of Private Manning's former military colleagues, 2 captains and a chief warrant officer and a sergeant, so all people that were superior to Private Manning in rank, who were with him in Iraq. And it was really interesting to talk with them, both in the witness waiting area, but also in their testimony, because the government has painted this picture of Private Manning as being inept and a malcontent. Their testimony was that he was their go-to guy. The guy that really knew what was going on. If you needed information, he was the person to go to, and was really a star performer. So it was interesting. It was a totally opposite perspective from the way he's been portrayed by the government as a malcontent. And again, after I testified, I had just a brief opportunity to talk with Private Manning. He shook my hand and thanked me for testifying on his behalf. And I just told him that, to hang in there. There are a lot of people pulling for him. So, again, I think it's really wearing on him, but he appeared to be in good spirits and upbeat.